we're good.
Names and stuff.
Yeah.
Alright, Aria Corsolson.
Aaron Petrowski.
Hunter Nichols.
William Casey.
And Dante Ruiz. Nate Pixley.
Alright. We're gonna start talking about like hobbies.
Sure. So the beginning.
Alright. Hobbes is very pessimistic about human nature. And I agree with him that, you know, we're all pretty like self-interested. But I don't think that we should give up our rights to to have a more peaceful life by means of having like a sovereign. I don't know, he seemed very pessimistic during his time about like what was going on.
Do you guys think that the threat of authority is like a very good way of bringing about good social homeostasis in society?
Could you say that again?
Do you think that having like an authoritative body or a sovereign like Hobbes talks about is important or is effective in bringing about social harmony?
I think Hobbes doesn't say like we want that, it's just we have to. Right?
Yeah. Because it's not that we want to be threatened by, you know, police officer X, but it's that it's effective in making us peaceable.
Yeah.
I think that it is, like, I think that we kind of naturally respond to authority, maybe from our upbringing, like having parents and people they do tend to, you know, like you'd love to have faith in human nature, but I think like, you know, like when your professor is very strict, like you do tend to invest more in the class simply because of the threat of them messing up your GPA or,
Yeah.
so.
I mean, Hobbes does say that the only true authority is between what a mother and her child. I don't know, it's funny, you see midterm scores kind of go up, or class scores go up right before midterm because there's a threat of people failing, but...
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like it's really easy to... It's really easy to, like, I want to say, like, cheat yourself in, for lack of a better expression, like, it's really easy for you to, I don't know, give up certain guidelines you set for yourself, because it's yourself, like, setting those guidelines, and so you yourself can also, like, reason them away. And so unless there's something else that's higher than you that's really dictating something, then, you know, it's like, there's always a reason that you can come up with for yourself to like, let go of something, or, you know, like, morals or whatever, you know, like.
No, absolutely, yeah. I mean, we can't argue that authority doesn't work, because obviously the society we live in now is a product of a sovereign or an authority.
Yeah.
It's like we need some sort of like stability with a sovereign, or like it's gonna be chaos.
Yeah.
We're all just gonna like fight for ourselves and get
Right.
Yeah.
But like when he's talking about it, it sounds like his sovereign can be like very authoritarian and like repressive. So he's saying like give up your rights, and then he'll treat you. He'll give you certain security over external threats and stuff. So that's why
You know, and you and society just has to hope that the sovereign is decent and just. You know, you can't.
But I mean, it kind of makes sense, because, I mean, he talks a lot about, like, a natural, like, he talks about competition, you know, like, we're naturally competitive, and, like, if there's no sovereign, then, like, somebody, like, natural human behavior, someone's gonna want to, like, have some sort of control, and we'll compete for that.
Absolutely.
There was one passage, it was like, this is why men don't get pleasure, and indeed do get much grief from being in the company of other men, without there being a power that can overawe them all. Because we're distracted by these things, like trying to compete, or we don't trust them, or, you know, we're trying to be better than someone else. And so unless there's something that's like distracting us from all those things, then, you know, we're so caught up in those feelings and, you know, trying to compete with everyone else that there's no peace.
I like the thing that he talked about with like torture, and he's saying how it's not regarded as a testimony, because he's saying like how a person being tortured is just gonna like say whatever they kind of want to say to stop being tortured. So that it's not necessarily like the truth that's coming out of them. It could be, but not necessarily, just so they could stop being tortured.
Right, because it comes back to their
That was just like an interesting point.
feeling of saving their own. What's it? It's like a natural right to save your own life, or something like that.
Yeah, you have like you have to do whatever's necessary to defend yourself and protect
Right.
yourself.
But it's interesting because he makes the distinction that it's whoever decides first that they need to protect themselves, are justifiably protecting themselves.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like
And you know, in the reading it's interesting because it notes that for as long as every man maintains his right to do anything he likes, all men are in the condition of war.
yeah, exactly. So at any moment, a man can
Yeah.
freak out and
Ryan Rodriguez, by the way, I can't remember what.
Best shirt on.
Dr. Dre.
There's kind of a part where Hobbes talks about, or like he admits that he's like a little pessimistic, but he kind of says we're all similar. Like when we lock our doors and we arm ourselves when we go out.
Yeah.
I mean, we all have an idea of a threat in our heads, and you know, ironically, the threat is of our own species.
Yeah, it's sad. It's like, why is human nature so negative? Self-interested.
Violent, yeah.
And he made an interesting point about like distrust. He says the most reasonable way for any man to make himself safe is to strike first. And when I think of this, it reminds me kind of like military strategies after like 9/11, and how they're just like attack the enemy first before they attack us, kind of thing.
Interesting.
So it's just like kind of like echoes what
Yeah,
previous administrations have said, you know.
yeah,
And it's pretty true. It's weird.
yeah, totally.
Do you think military like movements are at all based on philosophical reasoning?
Influenced by Hobbes. It's funny.
Maybe not directly, but like.
I feel like actually a lot of philosophical writing does deal directly with.
I feel like you would have to, because it's like they've got to have some sort of foundation to build their decisions on.
True.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true.
Having read a little bit of Plato too, he talks directly about the military and like what is ethical in terms of yeah.
Yeah.
Because like, what if society comes up and questions the military's actions, and they're like, well, you know, here's the reasoning. You know, naturally, I don't know. Maybe, I don't know if they
when
would
has
like
the military ever had to justify its actions? But
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Maybe internally, because they have to like make these decisions somehow. Like somebody is ultimately making a decision. There's got to be some sort of like conversation about it,
yeah.
right? It's not just
Yeah.
one person, and like if that one person is questioned, like I don't know, is he knowledgeable? Like, are they all knowledgeable in these philosophical reasonings,
Mm.
or are they just kind of going off of
Their own
their
interests.
experience or their own like understandings or their own like
Yeah.
Seems
thoughts
like
about it?
in a, you know, with a sovereign, you sort of in a society that's large enough, it almost necessitates like having a military or police arm.
Absolutely.
Because how are you supposed to enforce everybody? Like maybe in a group this size, probably like just the strongest one could beat everyone else up would be the sovereign.
Yeah.
But you know, when you have like, you know, thousands of people, you definitely need like an armed force.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting too, because you mentioned strength, but he also mentions the beginning of the reading cunning. You know,
Oh
the
yeah.
person strikes first by either strength of body or by secret plot or alliance with others.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, there has to be some alpha,
Absolutely.
and that's weird. I mean, why? That's just human nature, and maybe not even human nature. That's just nature of like living beings, you know, like
living in a
rules
large
like that.
society with people. Yeah, I mean it basically what Hobbes has done is he's analyzed what is like a fundamental human sentiment.
But what
Fear and-
I mean, I agree, but what I'm saying is it transcends species. Because
What do you mean by
animals are like that. There's always an alpha lion, or there's an alpha elephant,
True, yeah.
you know, they're always protecting, like, you know, it's mostly for mating reasons.
But I mean, the question is whether that order is decided in the same manner that order is decided in the human kingdom. You know.
Well, right, and so that's why it's interesting because we as humans have reason, so we can sit and like
Very
theorize
true,
about
yeah.
it. But the natural, the natural behavior of like living beings is
The natural
be
order,
competitive.
yeah, and it's almost in a way it's more natural because they don't have reason. It's just kind of like
Right.
the alpha is
It's just their instinct.
decided to say, yeah.
It reminds me of Hume. I think he says that reason follows the passions, and like that really ultimately all of his philosophy, it might just be a justification of like our instincts, like our instinctual impulses. We have like an alpha, and then you know the sovereign is just a very like high version of an alpha and very sophisticated and reasonable, but ultimately like it's just, you know, we're taking our animal instincts and justifying it and elaborating on it with our reason.
Absolutely. Do you guys want to move on to Hume? Do you want to do
I
something
mean,
about
that's a good transition.
Yeah, definitely.
It's just it's interesting that humans have reason and no other.
Yeah.
Well, it seems
I
like,
mean,
like what you just said, if Hume is arguing that reason is our basis for like moral foundation, then
I think Hume said that it was our
Emotions.
or our passions.
Yeah, Hume doesn't believe in reason.
yeah.
oh, I see what you're saying.
Passion, yeah.
Well, okay, so then I think that speaks more to what I was getting to, is like our emotions are like our instinctual. We don't have control over our emotions, and so he's almost. It seems like Hobbes is like harping off of the fact that naturally we're competitive in this kind of thing, and Hume is saying, well, yeah, we're emotional creatures and we can't help that, and that's a natural way of living, and therefore we should base our moral reasoning off of those
Moral
instinctual.
experiences, as we
Yeah,
not off reason.
But does Hume also say that we show compassion to others as well?
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
this goes against Hobbes's.
Wasn't that Kant that I was talking about?
No, sympathy and compassion. No, it's Hume.
Yeah, no,
That's
Hume's article, that's very interesting you bring that up because they go into almost the science behind his philosophy where medicine is now discovering like mirror neurons and crap like that, and
Oh,
in
yeah.
a way, you know, that's almost like a direct antithesis to what Hobbes is saying, where he says that every man is essentially out to take what's his, and you know, just the fact that all men can have all of their rights means every man is in a state of war. I think that's not specifically true when you have people who care about other people, and
Yeah,
you
it's
can
like-
actually measure that.
It's like where it says here, like if you're in an emergency room and you see you're not being operated, or you see someone else being operated on surgery, you feel their pain.
And
Like,
you cringe.
yeah, you feel like them like opening up and doing
Yeah,
surgery.
absolutely.
You know,
Yeah,
so that's a little bit different from Hobbes.
yeah.
But what would Hume say in the time where you kind of have to go against that compassionate state and do something wrong to someone else that's not close to you, kind of like rob them or like for you to survive, but that's kind of your instinct, your emotion, right?
You need to break past
Yeah.
like, that feeling of empathy. Somebody,
Yeah, that's interesting because I feel like ideally humans would want to behave as maybe a Hume prescribed, but there comes these times where we just need to shut that off and kind of go the Hobbesian route.
yeah.
Yeah.
You know, in the reading it says that Hume attempts to understand why we make moral judgments in situations where interests are not at stake. That's very interesting because, you know, that obviously goes directly against what Hobbes is saying.
Where was that passage you just read?
At the bottom part of 123. right under something moral judgment.
Oh, okay.
Oh, right. So we understand why make moral judgment decisions were not at stake. And so if our interests aren't at stake, then what's the next step? And that would be to relate to the closest like person, the closest like being to us.
What would an example of that be, just for the sake of conversation?
Mm.
An example or a moral judgment.
Well, what about like a court jury?
That's a good point.
Because they're not, their interests are not at stake,
Oh, right.
but it's, well, maybe
But then,
it is, because they're like,
Hobbes-
they're arguing for like the community. And they're
That's
part of the
true,
community.
exactly.
So like, I guess in a way that wouldn't really work.
and see from Hobbes' perspective, that would be a representation of the sovereign.
Mm-hmm.
That's a hard one, I'm not sure.
Well, let's see.
The point where you make it's about moral judgments, Hume says that we need to adopt the general point of view. It's like when we evaluate the merits of distinct characters, we must set our personal interests and attachments to the side and place ourselves in the position of those close to them. So like this, like when I think of this, it reminds me of like police killings of unarmed black men, and like a lot of like people in my high school are all like privileged and they don't understand like the situation of like why are people rioting, why are people coming out and protesting. It's like throughout years and years, like you guys aren't in their shoes, you know, you're not living in the.
It's not an isolated event.
Yeah, so you can't relate to that. It's like put yourself in their shoes and then see why all these protests and why is everyone being upset. I mean, there's a reason why.
Absolutely.
So it's just like.
So you mean to say that in the sense that we feel empathy for others, it's just like the closest person next to us that we feel empathy for?
Yeah, like.
Or whatever, however you would phrase that, the next. Whatever.
Like you have to be able to understand where they're coming from to see why they're acting the way they are, you know.
Okay.
And so that's interesting because I feel like the ability to sympathize with people is dependent upon your own experience.
Right.
Because I'm sure like everyone relates differently to different people because of where they've been in their life. And so like dependent like who you're gonna side with, whether it be the police or the rioters or the victims, whatever, it kind of depends on who you identify with,
Exactly.
closest to.
So like if your dad was a police officer, you're gonna go for your dad and police officer. You know, you're not gonna look at the background of what the situation was. You're gonna be like, oh, my dad's a cop, so I'm gonna support the police officer.
Well, and
In all aspects.
that brings up a good point, because what if, say your dad is a police officer, but, you know, you have been some victim of like an unfair crime from
A different
police,
officer.
yeah, like different police officer, like, so then, I don't know, like what happens when
You're like conflicting with your dad.
you've
like
got
questioning
these
experience.
different, you can relate to all sides. It isn't, maybe that's what she was saying, that's the true, is Hume the one who's talking about true judge?
True, yeah, true.
Right,
Yeah.
so then that's when you become the true judge, because you can relate with everyone
Right.
and be like, I know how each of you feel.
Yeah, that's a good example.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Like multiple viewpoints.
Mhm.
And then you can decide on what's right. Hit my main points.
We've only got a few more minutes when we do count.
Cool. So to start off, can anyone contrast Kantian, what was it, utilitarianism with how like a Kantian philosophy would respond to murder in society. Did you do that part of the reading?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So.
what's
Okay,
that
so
about?
for utilitarianists, it could be beneficial to murder someone if they have organs that can be used in like a group of people. But then Kantian logic would say that nobody will have been made an instrument of other survival or happiness in society. I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
Oh, because they're being used as a means and not an end.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. I think Kant would say that because when I read through Kant, it's like the way that their philosophy kind of goes like you. When he talks about the what's it called, the imperfect, imperfect,
Yeah, yeah.
and he's like giving these examples, and most of the examples are like you want to do an action, and you gotta see if that action would apply to everyone. Or you want that action to be a natural law, meaning everybody does it. And if you don't,
Right.
then it's an imperfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when it comes back to that, if you want to, so someone needs to sacrifice for the organ for everyone else, and should we do that? I think Kant would say no, we can't do that because everyone's is going to be in fear.
Because if you apply
Yeah.
at that position to every single person.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting.
But for the utilitarian, like, yeah, you know, it's for the greater good.
Right.
Yeah.
So it depends on the society you're dealing with. If everyone's utilitarianism, utilitarianist, then they'd be like, yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
Or hive mind or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
For the greater good.
Right, and yeah, they also bring up a good point where they said that if we follow the utilitarian way, it will lead to more happiness than if we follow the Kant's philosophy in the society. They find that somewhere.
It's interesting.
So what do you guys think is better, Kantian or utilitarian?
I think utilitarian,
That's what I was thinking.
you know, I was going to say I think utilitarian philosophies would leave a larger body of like happiness on the overall, but from a Kantian perspective, I think each individual could potentially have like a greater level of happiness because no one would take advantage of them.
True.
You know.
That's true.
But can't they be combined in a sense? Because what if a utilitarianist like thought was like, well, what if like if the benefit of my organs is gonna be best for everyone else, then yeah, that's what I want for everyone. I would want someone to do that for me. I would want to do that for someone else.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask what Kant would say about someone volunteering.
Yeah.
That's what they were talking about. Like, it's okay if they're willing to do it.
Oh, I see.
If both agree, they're used as means. Like if I go to the one that I'm using, if you go to a theater, you're using him as a means, but he also knows that he's using you as a means to get paid. And both parties are
Happy.
they give the consent
Right.
of being means.
Yeah.
Like one thing I was talking about is like on page 141 on second paragraph. It says it's conceivable that a society of cons, all of whom took the pains to use no other as means, would end up with less happiness or fewer persons of life. That was some societies have complying utilitarianism. I think that's interesting. Why would that be? Why would
That's interesting. I think it's because society, it's not seeing itself in the function of utility, it's seeing itself in the function of almost like from the perspective of longevity, where we don't want to perturb or like affect other people. And that's the exact opposite with utilitarian logic.
And like, in which way would following the Kant's thing would lead to less happiness? Like, what's the reason?
Would lead to unhappiness?
To or end up with less.
Yeah,
With
I'm
less
trying to figure that out
happiness.
too.
Maybe
It's
we
like-
think of like happiness as like a number that's shared between us all, and
I think it would lead to less happiness because with utilitarians, you're just inevitably going to be able to help more people than if you were dealing with, you know, some sort of Kantian model. Just in the sense that, like, you know, you can do experiments on people, you can figure out new shit for medicine in a utilitarian world, whereas with Kant's whole vision, like, you wouldn't be able to do that. You couldn't just like experiment on people and all that kind of shit. So
I think like the overall, like with the Kantian, like things would never get very severe or bad for anybody,
absolutely.
but the peak that they could achieve of like well-being is probably lower. The utilitarian though, I mean, you could sacrifice people for the betterment of others, so you could end up doing very harsh things, but they could reach higher in terms
Absolutely.
of like,
Yeah.
Well, the issue with Kant's philosophy is like you can never pursue any self-interest, because in pursuing self-interest you got to use other people as means.
Okay.
No.
But see, you know, then you can just argue that there's a willingness between two people, and like, you know, you pursuing an interest in buying clothes is reciprocated in the cashier's interest in making money off of you. So, you know, in that perspective, you could pursue your own interest. You would be limited, but
Yeah. I mean,
that's like whoever brought up like why we can't just share utilitarian and Kantian philosophy is like why we can't just like splice them together. Like, I think that's like a huge problem with philosophy, where philosophers just present like one perspective and it's like, no,
Yeah.
like do this shit. It's like that's how you're supposed to live your life.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, it's like, do the philosophers just say this is the way of thinking and like not consider mixing other
Yeah.
values? Like,
I think we talked about in our section like pluralism, like sort of entertain like making a philosophy while acknowledging that I remember the section leader is like you know, there was a book called like A Theory of Morality, and
Right.
that was a pluralistic thing because it's an A theory. It wasn't implying it's the theory.
Right.
Some are very absolutist, while others are more
Yeah.
pluralistic.
I think that's the most interesting thing about studying all these things is like, well, there's like a little bit of this one, a little bit of this one, and like there's some things about that one I don't like, but then like there's
Yeah,
some parts of this one that
yeah,
I think
it's
still
very
work,
obvious.
and like,
You take the pieces that you want and apply it to everything.
But in a sense, I mean, every philosopher kind of does that. Like, if you think, like, when they made up their philosophy, likely they had read a lot of philosophies and they consider themselves to be like, oh, I think Jean Foucault, like, I'm taking them, you know, the best from all the stuff I've read. But when we look back, we look at them as very narrow because since then there's been so many more.
Yeah. Yeah.
How are we looking?
if we start at 12:30, we should be good. So,
Cool.
Small talk?
yeah.
Any discussion here?
Awesome.
One more to go. Final project. Batman, yeah.
Maybe not drink that.
Some people probably get creative.
Against not doing that, man. But
I wasn't originally gonna do it, but now.
yeah, I wanted to do this story, but now I'm thinking like, shit, I'm an engineer. What am I thinking?
Yeah, exactly.